Dane Rose here, and thank you for joining me on this one-year journey to dramatically improve our well-being. And in this week, building on last week's theme, and again, I recommend that you listen and engage in these subjects in sequence. So this is week number 8. Let me just double check that. Now it's week number 9. So week number 9. And the awareness, just stepping back a little bit and building on last week's focus on how lovable are you in technical terms, and the exercise to determine that and to double or quadruple your lovability. This is building on that same deepening relationships. And this is specifically for romantic relationships. So if you're not in a romantic relationship and are not preparing to be in a relationship, just go on to another exercise. Again, the 80-20 rule. Week number 1, ignore 80% of what I'm saying and focus on the 20% that's going to change your life. So in this week, how old are you? Well, the outer age doesn't matter that much, but the inner age does, and this is particularly the case in deeply vulnerable friendships, in deeply vulnerable romantic relationships. Now, this terrain is so vulnerable, so sensitive, that there is a demographic in Western cultures that actively avoid the terrain altogether. It's the terrain in the biology of love and relationships. There is the part of the brain that deals with lust. There is the part of the brain that deals with romantic love. And there's the part of the brain that deals with attachment. Now this comes into play not with lust, although it's important to note that when you're in relationship, lust part of the brain may be in relationship with attachment part of the brain in the other party. And if you honor and care about your partner in any relationship, it matters not only where you are, but where they are. And if either party is in attachment, we're going to be dealing with emotional terrain that, going back to an earlier workshop on well-being, ties in with trauma, ties in with parent-child relationships. And when there is unresolved trauma, as there is in more than 60% of the population, there is going to be certain trigger points. Number 1, there's going to be certain terrain within the psyche. Number 2, that is triggered by those trigger points, in which the inner age diverges wildly from the outer age. Give an example. There's certain terrain in my romantic relationships where I feel 2 years old. 2 years old and reliving some of the abandonment type fears and feelings that reflect the relationship I had with my mother and father. That is tied in with elements of a traumatic state. Now, this has nothing to do with the other parts of my inner landscape that are not triggered, that are, older than my age, or, etc. So the first thing to grasp is that the inner age does not have anything to do with your outer age. I've dated 80-year-old women that, you get into certain terrain and they're 3 years old. And it's like, how old are you feeling inside? I feel like I'm 3 years old. And what's that 3-year-old going through? Terrified of abandonment, this, that, and the other, that, whatever it is. So what the question to bring into deeper emotional relationships is, how old are you and how old is your partner moment to moment? Now, here's where this really matters. Every age is capable of certain things and not capable of certain things, number one. And it doesn't matter the age of the body, it matters the age of the consciousness. So if you're talking to a 3-year-old, first of all, 3-year-olds need a great deal of emotional acceptance. So you cannot have a logical conversation with a 3-year-old. But that in and of itself is very logical. Meaning, it is illogical to have a logical conversation with a 3-year-old. Now, here's where this is powerful. If you have a strong mind, you will have experienced in your relationships seeing something with complete lucidity and your partner responding completely illogically to the facts, to the data. And if you are not trained to look through this lens, you will do exactly what so many dogmatic, strong thinkers do in this situation. You will criticize the other person for not behaving rationally. And you're going to put the irrationality on them, basically. You're going to say, that is so irrational. That doesn't make any sense. That is stupid. What kind of a crazy response is that? This is the rational response if you're dealing with someone over 25 years old internally. A 25-year-old or up has enough life experience, has enough mental training, blah, 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 that this will work. Because if you tell an emotional 30-year-old, wait a minute, you said you wanted to be loved. You said this would help you feel loved. I've just done this, and you just tell me you hate me. That doesn't add up. A rational person will say, you're absolutely right. That does not add up. Let me see what's going on here. I left out this detail. That's on me. And you're absolutely right. So I take responsibility. You need to add in this detail. And then I think it'll work. That's a rational response from a rational person in response to a rational question. What is going on here? However, if you are dealing with a 5-year-old, if you are dealing with a traumatized 2-year-old, if you are dealing with an overwhelmed 7-year-old, it is irrational for you to treat them like a 30-year-old. Now, this is getting outside of the arrogance and dogma that says people should behave like their outer age. This is an irrational statement. Why? Well, first of all, who's coming up with this should? That's where the question should come into. Who's coming up with this should? So you should act your age. But the data says they are not acting their age. So maybe that assumption is false. Maybe people do act their emotional age, and this is a fact, and they will continue to regress into younger ages as long as there is unresolved turmoil emotions at those younger ages that they are still dealing with. Maybe you are doing the same thing. Maybe when this happens and this happens and this happens, it triggers a memory, and you feel like you're 14 years old and just want to fight everyone and attack and criticize because that makes you feel safe and clear. But that's a really dumb thing to do in the context you're in, but you're going to do it anyway because you're reacting like a 14-year-old. Maybe it's a really dumb idea to have sex with someone who's half drunk when you're married, but you're going to do it anyway because you're captivated by the frustrations of your 18-year-old and never being able to do this and and this is my chance and and so you're going to behave like an 18-year-old. So maybe rather than saying you should act your age, and you should too, and there's something wrong with you if you're not acting your age, and it's up to you to figure that out, grow up, and act your age, and I will sit here pouting and fuming and criticizing you until you do. And when that doesn't work, which it doesn't, just heads up in case you haven't noticed, it doesn't work, then you can go off to your buddies and say, would you believe the infantile behavior of my husband? Would you believe the idiot? Well, I said this, and da-da-da-da-da. And you can commiserate. Tell me about it. These irrational women, these juvenile men, blah, 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 blah. You can do that. And you will get complete backing because the person you're talking to is not regressed. It makes perfect sense to a mature mind and emotion. But here's what makes a lot more sense. And here's where getting off the high horse comes in. We are an emotionally illiterate culture, number one. How many hours did you spend in school learning about jealousy, learning about attachment, learning about the 3 parts of the brain? You are in a culture that is emotionally illiterate. How rational is it to expect emotionally illiterate people to behave like emotionally literate people? That is not rational. How rational is it to think that to develop your mind, you've got to learn math, you've got to learn to read and write, you've got to read this book, you've got to read that book, but to develop your emotions, you don't have to do anything. In fact, we're going to have a lifetime of suppression. You feel that? I don't want to hear about that. Don't tell me you feel that way. You don't feel like that. You do not talk to your parents like that. And you don't say you're bored. You study. How intelligent is it to expect a population base that has had their emotions denied, betrayed, lied about, suppressed, shamed, humiliated, and completely otherwise ignored with not a single hour in school of how to be emotionally intelligent? How intelligent is it to expect that population base to behave as if they'd had 3 or 4 years of intense emotional training, using rational paradigms from people that actually wanted to hear their emotions rather than shut them up because they wanted to talk, etc., etc., etc. So it is irrational to expect emotional literacy. It is also irrational to expect that whatever is going on that's regressing someone, making them feel 5 years old, 7 years old, etc., is going to disappear because you tell them it should disappear. It's like saying Your house is here. It's on the wrong side of the property line. It should be over here. Great. Good analysis. It is indeed across the property line. And you go right ahead and just lift the house up and move it over, and then it will be where it should be. I don't know how to do that. Okay, well, that's about as logical as going to your partner who should be behaving rationally and who isn't, and telling them exactly how they should be feeling. And they're saying, okay, well, if you can just lift up all my rebellion, rage, terror, anger, shame, confusion, and if you can just lift it up and move it over to where you think it ought to be, I will agree with you. But until you do that, stop wasting our time telling me what I should be feeling and pay attention to me. So here's the intelligent response. How old do you feel inside? Right now, I feel 3 years old. What does your 3-year-old feel? Scared, lonely, da-da-da. What is she scared about? She's remembering this time my mother shouted at me, da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay. That sounds absolutely terrifying. What does she need? She needs a hug. She needs to know she's not going to be yelled at again for saying the wrong thing. She doesn't know what to say. Sounds terrifying. Okay, we're going to hug that 3-year-old. And the mind that has the 30-year-old comments to make to a 30-year-old is going to have to be patient until that 3-year-old calms down. How old do you feel now? Well, I feel 20. I feel whatever. Well, can we come back to where you're 30 years old? Now, this may sound like therapy. And in good therapy, this kind of dialogue, inner ages, etc., voice dialogue, a variety of things working with inner personas, does go on very effectively. It's a good training ground. But I've done more than $150,000 of therapy with 30 practitioners. And younger ages have never gone away. And I meet them in 80-year-olds, I meet them in 20-year-olds, I meet them in 5-year-olds. So I think it's irrational, given that data of evidence, to expect our partners and friends never to feel 5 years old, never to feel 7-year-old. I feel like a 6-year-old boy. I'm about to be yelled at. I don't know what to do. Please don't punish me. That's how I feel right now. So the rational response of someone is to, one, when if you think you're talking with a 30-year-old, they start to behave in a way that doesn't make sense for a 30-year-old to behave. The rational response, and this is where trust and care and vulnerability and deep communication comes in, is to say, how old do you feel right now? Well, I don't want to answer that question. Well, that sounds like there's a lot of anger and rebellion. Is that a teenage age? How do you feel? What's going on in there? I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to tell you it's a wrong feeling. That is irrational. Telling someone their feelings are wrong is stupid. It's stupid because it doesn't take you where you say you want to go. You say you want to end up with an adult having an adult conversation, and you're talking with a teenager. It's stupid to tell the teenager how fucked up they are and that they're not the one you want to talk to. You think that teenager is going to respond well to that? Fuck you, I'm leaving this relationship. No one's going to tell me what to do. Okay. You've treated a teenager like an adult. They've kept treating you like a teenager, which is perfectly rational. You've lost the relationship and you feel superior. Fucking juveniles, why can't people be, and you go off and you lost the magic. You lost the love. But you go down, you spend time. Okay, you're 16 years old now. What's she dealing with? You deal with it. You deal with the young ages and you come up to the adult. That's how it works. You traumatize and blame and shame and punish the young ages. They get stuck there in an endless loop. They get stuck there in young coping strategies. And you don't ever get to deal with an adult. What's more, if you shame your partner for regression, which is, in a sense, shaming them for being human in an emotionally illiterate culture, they're not going to trust you to go into their 3-year-old again. But it will come up again. They will be 3 years old again. But this time they're not going to tell you. They say, I don't want to talk to you. No, nothing. It's nothing. And you've just lost the relationship. Why? Because it is something. It's something that's really important to a 3-year-old. And you have no idea what it is because you're so busy judging that the 3-year-old is even there. And so you don't get to hear it. And the emotional mechanism of a human being is they don't mature until the youngest age that is in panic, trauma, crisis, dissociation, whatever, is responded to. Well, there's a lot of you, a lot of people in the world that are absolutely clear they don't want to deal with this terrain. And you have a great option. You can go out and have anonymous sex for the rest of your life until the regression happens. And then you can disown and shame that little girl or that little boy in that partner. And you can gossip and make them feel like shit. You can go on and find the next partner and see when it happens. Or you can find someone who is so good at controlling and hiding their emotions that there's no magic, there's no chemistry. Sex is terrible. You have those choices. Or you have the choice to learn to love that little girl. And you have the choice to learn to love that little boy. And to teach each other what those needs are at that age. And as soon as those needs are met, those ages release the consciousness up to the next age. And when you get up to a magnificent adult who knows how to love themselves, who knows how to coach and be loved by their partner, who knows how to love their partner, and that has a lot more self-awareness about what kinds of things hurt human beings at 3 years old, 5 years old, 8 years old, etc. And as a result, is a more sensitive person. If you ever want to have kids, you want someone who knows this data. Because if he can't love the 3-year-old in you, he can't love it in a baby. If she can't honor the very vulnerable, sensitive 6-year-old who's starting to fall in love and attachment and needs some security, if she's sarcastic with that 6-year-old, he goes into shame, the magic shuts down. And your 6-year-old develops an addiction by the time they're in their teens. It's illogical to expect logic from a regressed human being. And I've never met a partner. I've had 70 partners in my life. I have never met a person that does not fluctuate in their inner age and that goes deep. Now, I've met plenty of partners that anytime we get close to emotional depth, they have an internal defense system. I don't have time for this. I don't have time. I'm too busy for that. No, I don't want to talk about that. No, I don't want to. And they're basically guarding from every emotional depth on all sides. And anytime it creeps in, they're terrified and they run off. They burst into tears because some emotion came in and caught them unaware. I'm so sorry. I've embarrassed myself. I've got to excuse myself. And they run off until they've got a lid on it. And you can deal with that person. And there will be no magic, no depth. It may seem sophisticated. You can have a gorgeous body, all this kind of stuff. But the magic will be missing. The real magic. Because a healthy 3-year-old who feels safe has an innocence that no other age has a curiosity, and has the ability to be loyal to a relationship. The way a 15-year-old is not loyal. So you dishonor that 3-year-old because you didn't know that you were dealing with a 3-year-old. Now the 3-year-old doesn't feel loyal to you, doesn't share that innocence and magic with you. She doesn't feel safe with you. You're the enemy now. I don't want to be around that guy. He shouts at me, he's condescending to me, he's rough with me, da 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 da. And the 3-year-old starts plotting her way out, how she's going to hide, how she's already out of the relationship, how she's going to seek a much safer dad, a much safer mom. And no, she's not going to tell this and that and the other. And slowly, as you lose each age, by dishonoring, by not understanding that it's present in the relationship, you have a bunch of dry, often alcoholic, that's the way to connect with the feelings when they're not there and honored in another way. People that can debate and agree on anything. They don't feel passion. They don't feel attachment. Their sex is perfunctory or abusive. I need to be tied up and whipped and this and that and the other to get any little bit of arousal. Can you do that for me? Fine, I'll tie up. You want 3 whips? Okay, fine. Gosh, it's boring. Very, very boring. So what's your terrain into this? So number 1, notice how old you feel. Start noticing. And pay attention to the face. That's not a face of a 30-year-old who's free and in control of their life. That's a face of a little boy who's expecting to be hit. So you've got to relate to that. Hold on, just to let you know, I'm 6 years old right now. I'm scared of being punished. Could we cuddle a little bit before carrying on with this conversation? Oh, how juvenile. Okay, you just lost him right there. That 6-year-old has had plenty of kind, tender women, and he knows you're not one of them. Get lost. You've lost him, and with him you've lost his wonder. You've lost his curiosity. You've lost his poetry. The one who will write you a poem. You've lost him. Well, you're not going to be caught in some juvenile and you're not going to get poetry that has real feeling to it. Take your pick. You ask your partner how old they are. You pay attention to how old you are, and you respond accordingly. It's that simple. Now, this takes time. It doesn't fit into because if you want to deal with that 3-year-old and have her come up again, maybe she needs the cuddle to last all night. Maybe she needs this, maybe she needs that. There is a magical doorway that you can open by honoring these ages. It is incredible. Absolutely incredible. And every person has the doorway, but many of us have thrown away the key, and we conspire with our partners not to go back there. Oh, you don't want to spend time with my 3-year-old. No, I don't. Okay, let's hide her off in the closet. But there's a lot that is lost by trying to fit into the cultural narrative, the uninformed cultural narrative, the lie that there are these people walking around with no baggage, no trauma, no deep emotional feelings, no attachment. You will find them at some times. I meet women at times who, sex, whatever. They've completely separated the sex from their emotions. They actually go through a ritual. This is more common if the person is experienced in the sex trade or something like that. I had one girlfriend that was a sexual masseuse. Absolutely gorgeous body. I love talking with her. And every single time I felt really close to her, I wanted to be sexual, she had this little ritual. I would communicate that I was interested. She'd say, oh, sure, whatever. And then she'd do this little thing. She'd get up. She'd change position. She'd go to the toilet, and the woman who walked back was not the woman who I wanted to have sex with. It was a dissociated woman that had no emotion. I asked her about it. I said, you're not here. Where have you gone? She said, oh, men like that. Men just want to fuck me. And so I make myself available. But the way she did it was not being present. So if I wanted a 10 out of 10 body, if I wanted to fuck any way I wanted to, she's the one. If I want a woman who's deeply connected to her feelings and her body, I don't have her. And I couldn't find her. I tried for a week. Is there any way that we can approach sensuality where you don't disappear? The training was too deep. Dissociation. She was interested in the relationship. I was interested in a relationship if we could connect emotionally. I was always alone. So that's doable. Meaning perfect body, fuck any way you want, no emotion, no magic. It's doable. But the price for me is too high. If you're in that category, you're going to need to get to know the ages inside and out. And then we come into the concept of marriage. I want to talk to you about what marriage is for me. Marriage is when my 2-year-old feels safe and loves your 2-year-old, and your 2-year-old feels safe and loves my 2-year-old. That's marriage of the 2-year-olds. Marriage of the 2-year-old and the 5-year-old is when my 5-year-old treats your 2-year-old well. So I can be 5 years old and you can be 2-year-old, and it's still a good relationship. When your 2-year-old can be with my 40-year-old and your 2-year-old doesn't feel it's going too fast and she's not invisible, there's a marriage between the 2-year-old and the 40-year-old. And what we're aiming at in a complete marriage, and it does not matter what kind of paperwork is involved, because you're married not based on paper, but based on the inner ages and the full range of who you are, the personas, your different identities, your work identity and all that. Like your work identity may hate your partner, so inefficient, but your lover identity absolutely loves him because he's magical in his inefficiency. Or your work partner looks down on him as a less than because you think value is defined by work. And your lover partner can't get enough of him. This is not a deep marriage. Your 5-year-old is craving the next touch. And your 40-year-old is looking down at him with disrespect. You think that marriage can last. It's not going to last. And your 5-year-old is going to cry. Because the person you pick that's so appropriate for your sophisticated career image has paid the price of letting go of his 5-year-old. So your 5-year-old aches. Where is the love? Your 40-year-old says, now I've got a real catch. But why don't I feel anything? The real marriage pairs all the ages harmoniously. Now, I've never had a real marriage in 40 lover relationships, 70 sexual experience. I've never had a real marriage. But meaning where all the ages line up. They don't have to and they're not going to. But one of the more important ages is the little boy and the little girl, how they are treated by the older parts and how they treat each other. How you treat your little girl, how he treats his little boy, etc. It's important. I consider it more important that the little ones get on than if the older ones get on. Because if the older one says, no, you should vote for this president, and the other one says, no, you should vote for that one, who gives a shit? But if the little ones, I want to play with you. I love creating with you. I have a dream when I'm with you. Just looking into your eyes is magical. This is the medicine that we need as depraved, modern human beings. So separated from our emotions and our bodies with 40, 50, 60, 70-hour work weeks and commutes. They have nothing to do with our deep sense of well-being. If you can find that magic by honoring the young age in another, it is precious. Very, very, very precious. So this is the perfect marriage. And if you are perfectly married, you are never going to leave each other, paper or no paper. If your 40-year-old shames your partner's 4-year-old, and they shame your 6-year-old, and those parts never feel fully safe to open up into the deep waters, you can be in an emotionless, passionless marriage for 60 years. And you will never be touched in the way that you would if the older parts could love the younger parts in themselves, in the other. So this is a choice. It's a difficult choice for the modern routine. I've changed my life, so I have the room to do this kind of thing. Because it doesn't fit neatly into a 2-hour date 2 or 3 times a week. Sex can, but not this deep kind of marriage love. And sex without this internal marriage deteriorates, either requiring more and more bizarreness to hold the attention. You can take the BDSM path, or just losing interest. And so you can move on to another person that has the initial excitement of newness and shame their little girl and have them shame your little boy and da-da-da, and it wears down, and then you go and find another one. You're basically taking potential relationships and polluting them with shame and judgment and going on to the next. And then you wonder why you meet these drained, unenthusiastic, unsoulful partners who are just showing up for another date in almost an addictive habit. It's because they don't know how to honor the inner ages that are there in themselves or in anyone else. And the most powerful place to be in this terrain is being able to spot a partner who wants to love the young parts in themselves and in another, who honors all of who they are, who likes their dogmatic adolescent, their curiosity, their passion, their spontaneity, their wonder. They like it. And they like it in you. And they like that you're not always mature. And they like it that you're not always immature. They like the range and the breadth. And they're willing to take responsibility for the learning all those different parts of you and teaching and loving and playing around. That is an exciting partner. And if you find someone who's able and willing to do that, it doesn't matter if they're in a terrible state when you meet. You're going to start, it's going to be like finding barren soil and planting a garden. It'll grow and grow. And whenever the relationship ends, if it's a week, if it's an hour, if it's a year, if it's 10 years, if it's the rest of life, it'll be richer in the inner landscape than when you began. But the first unveiling is the blind spot to think that a 40-year-old should feel 40 years old and therefore should respond as if they're 40 years old rather than finding out how they actually feel. You'll find some people are pretty static. They're always 20 years old and they don't really like any part of them that isn't 20 years old. And so if you want to have a relationship with a 20-year-old and will help them do it and help them feel like a teenager and all that, they will appreciate that. They'll hang in there with you as long as you facilitate that role. But it's not as static as a relationship where they're also 40, 50 years old, where they're also 2 years old, 1 year old. So Love to hear how you work with this. Thanks for the honor of your attention.